Hi guys, welcome back to the podcast. Today, I'm really excited to have Sara Nanchanatt with me. She's the founder of SN Forensics in New York, and she's here to talk to us about her career so far as a forensic accountant and starting up her own firm earlier this year. Sara, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks for having me.
So my first question for you is, when you meet someone new at a networking event or a dinner party or out and about, how would you explain to them what you do for a living?
That's a great question. And I've kind of refined that and had to refine it by having my own firm. So I like to say that forensic accounting is the intersection of like accounting and investigations. So forensic really just means that it's suitable for the court of law. So a lot of and most of what we do, we run in parallel with attorneys, litigations, active matters where people don't know where money went, how much money there is, and what they might be entitled to based on state law. And so that is really what we're doing as it like boils down to the simplest form.
It's a niche but growing area of accounting, and I think one that lots of particularly young CPAs, maybe coming out of audit or tax, are thinking maybe this could be a more exciting career path for me. How did you yourself find forensics as an industry? How did you get into this line of work?
So when I was in school, I had heard about it. I always thought it was something I wanted to do. I love puzzles and numbers, and I thought it would be a great fit for me. And then truthfully, I just got really lucky. As I was applying for jobs, CRA, Charles River Associates had an opening, and I submitted an application just like off the website. I didn't know anyone. And I got an interview and then obviously got the position and really spearheaded my career from there.
Fantastic. So CRA for maybe people listening coming from a traditional CPA firm, maybe a big four or maybe a more regional one. I guess for a bit of background for those people listening, CRA is a bit of a different setup, isn't it? It's not a traditional CPA firm.
Correct. So it's an economic consulting firm. So forensic accountant is one aspect of it. They also have life sciences consulting, which I think is their largest practice. Since I was there, they've really grown out their computer and digital forensics practice as well. So they work a lot in the cybersecurity industry. And so the shift kind of happened around when I started at CRA, that because of independence rules, forensic accounting, partners were having a really hard time bringing in clients at the big four or other public firms. So they shifted to more private consulting firms where they wouldn't have, restrictions similar to audit has on taking in clients and being able to grow their practice.
And this has been a really big growth area for forensics, hasn't it, in the last sort of 10 to 15 years? I think, firms like CRA or HKA, FTI, Kroll, these, like you say, non-CPA firms that don't have audit or tax service lines that, whilst for those big CPA firms, they may generate a lot of revenue, it does for those advisory departments cause a lot of these conflicts, doesn't it?
Right. And like you said, there is the downside of, lack of revenue generation with clients that are already involved with the firm. So there's definitely a risk going to that consulting firm. You're not already doing their taxes. You're not already auditing their books, and you have to get clients outside of that realm.
Excellent. So starting at CRA, you were there quite a few years now. You had a couple of promotions in that time as well, and you did your CPA whilst you were there as well, right?
Correct.
So sort of the fundamental building blocks, I suppose, of your career started there. What kind of cases would you have been involved with during that time?
Yeah, so I had a really interesting time at joining CRA for a couple of reasons. One is that they were just opening their Boston office. So they opened their Boston office in October 2019. I interviewed that December and I started that January. So really new people. It was under a new vice president. He had brought a couple people from his prior firm, and I was the first, off the street hire for the practice. And then I start in January 2020. So I'm there for like 3 months before the world shuts down and we go to COVID. And so it really shifted the way that we handled cases. One, because our office was so small in Boston, it was a true like sink or swim environment. 5 months in, I was running my own cases involving e-discovery, working with attorneys, damages disputes, which at another firm is kind of unheard of for an associate to start running their own cases. And then what happened was CRA had been very geographically exclusive. So you're hired in Boston, you're hired under that VP, you do all of your work for that VP. But when we went remote with COVID, it opened the opportunity that I could work with the Chicago VP or the Minneapolis VP or on a New York case. And so at a time where the world was shutting down, CRA was really thriving because we took away those geographic restrictions and we were working on cases all over the country remotely. And so what that meant was like 80 hours a week of work, data analytics, really just building out my skill set at a much higher rate than most entry-level associates have the opportunity to.
It sounds in a weird way that almost COVID helped the early days of your career, as strange as that
I
is to say.
really think it is strange to say, but I really have to agree because it also shifted the whole industry. So I know we'll get into, my own firm and what I do, but it created this virtual relationship between experts and attorneys and their clients that kind of transcend your geographic area. So if you think about me, like I'm in New York, it's one of the most densely populated areas for forensic accountants and experts, but I get to work on cases all over the country. So it doesn't matter that there's a lot of competition in, immediate area.
And then you probably couple that with the fact you did go to a more specialized firm. I would say really you got sort of an amount of experience under your belt in 2 to 3 years that most people wouldn't get in 5 to 6 at a much larger firm like the Big
Correct.
Four.
And that's honestly why I ended up going into forensics. So I didn't go to an accounting school for college, which, as anyone listening to this will know, was a horrible idea. I didn't know I wanted to do accounting. So I had to make my own accounting major. I took classes at other schools. I literally borderline stalked someone from an elevator who worked at PwC to get my resume to them, to get my junior year internship. And I interned in audit, and it was just such a large firm, so many people, that the opportunities for growth and to distinguish yourself really weren't there in those first couple of years. And so as I was reflecting of like, should I go back to public or should I look for something new? I was really looking for that autonomy and that growth opportunity. And I got that like tenfold at CRA. As you mentioned, like a couple of promotions, I got promoted every year when I was there. I was running cases. I was overseeing junior associates. I was working directly with clients, directly with lawyers, prepping VPs for expert testimony, prepping their expert reports. And I don't know of another environment that I would have gotten such like a vast experience in such a short period of time.
I completely agree. And I think this is something I very often tell younger candidates that I work with, maybe someone that's done 1 or 2 years in audit, got their CPA license and thinking about moving to forensics. And more often than not, they've trained in a very large firm and they're very used to and very comfortable in that environment. But I think the rewards are definitely there if you're willing to try your hand in a more specialized environment like a CRA or one of their competitors.
Right.
You have this great couple of years at CRA, like you say, you progress very quickly, you get to work on some really interesting cases, and then you make a move that, again, I think a lot of forensic accountants have probably considered at different points in their career. You go to FINRA, which for most American listeners, they're probably going to know who that is, but maybe for any of our UK or European listeners, maybe if you'd be able just to quickly give us an overview as to who FINRA are.
Yes. So FINRA regulates the securities market in the US. So it's kind of a funny distinction between them and the SEC, but they regulate broker dealers. So if you have a brokerage account at a firm and you pay a per fee or per trade commission on your account, as opposed to just someone who's managing it, they're taking a percentage of your AUM, that's something that FINRA regulates. So it's people who are actively soliciting trades from their clients, who are registered representatives under FINRA, and then the broker dealers that they work with.
And moving into a regulator like this, I think a lot of forensic accountants think about it as a career option because that sort of compliance side of forensics that you're going to deal with, like you say, the types of clients, these broker dealers and the people you're going to be working with, I imagine particularly in New York, that must be a very, very busy job.
It is. And, the shift happened with FINRA as well during the pandemic, that they used to be regionally specific. And it was if you were in the New York office, you only worked with New York clients. But again, because of the pandemic, it really shifted to like a national viewpoint. And so when I started at FINRA, I was actually in Boston. I was the only person on my team in Boston. It didn't matter. Everyone worked remotely. And so I was in an initial review group in FINRA. So we got hundreds, maybe thousands of complaints, filings from broker dealers every single day. And you had to go through and figure out the validity to the claim. Is it something that was under our jurisdiction? And then what steps did we need to take to investigate this further and see if there was a problem? And so similar to CRA, super high volume, super high pressure, which apparently seems to be where I thrive. And it was great. And then also during my time there, because I was one of a few CPAs in my department, I also did net capital investigations. So each broker dealer has different net capital compliance based on whether or not they hold their clients' funds, the different activities they participate in. And so I would help with some of the reviews for that compliance as well.
Would you say there were any either pros or cons of coming into that kind of regulatory environment from a CPA firm environment? Because, like you say, you were one of maybe a few people in your department that came from that CPA background. Did that give you think, any particular advantages, or were there any, say, steep learning curves that you had to overcome coming from that different background?
Yeah, so I think what was interesting is most of my counterparts were attorneys. And so as a forensic accountant, that is your counterpart on every case. So I was very comfortable with working with attorneys, having that legal background and knowledge, and getting to learn from them because, I don't know the ins and outs of every single FINRA rule, how it holds up in court. And so I could really rely on them for helping me with that industry specific information. Where the CPA and the forensic accounting hat was really helpful was the data analytics that came in for some of these cases, and also some of the inquisitive, skeptical, mindset that comes with being a CPA and having professional skepticism in forensic accounting specifically. And so where I really excelled at FINRA was my data analytics background. So when I was at CRA, I was one of the few people who really had a comfort in that area. And so I would build models for cases and really build that out. And so when I got to FINRA, one of the areas where I felt they were lacking at the time was they didn't have great analytics in place for some of the specific cases, but also for FINRA as a whole. Like, as an example, we had one product that came in maybe 10 to 20 times over 3 to 4 months. And so if you don't have a system to quantify and analyze that, we can't predict if that's going to be a bigger problem. And so it turns out later that it was a fraudulent product and information had kind of trickled in, but we didn't have the technology and the analytics in place to pick up on that with the high volume of claims that were coming in. So what I ended up doing a lot at FINRA was building out some of these operational models and data analytics to help FINRA become a little bit more preventative as opposed to reactionary when these types of issues occur.
Mm. And so you take that experience coupled with CRA, and then you joined Travelers, which again, for anyone not in the sort of financial services sector, huge multinational insurance brand. And again, we're talking just before we started recording about, that really being sort of the third option that many forensic accountants think about, sort of going in-house, whether it be in a more traditional, maybe internal investigations or compliance roles, or particularly in the insurance sector, these sort of business interruption roles that increasingly insurers or insurance consultancies, maybe like Marsh, are bringing in-house. Again, how did that role maybe differ from those early experiences you had at CRA and FINRA?
Yeah, so what I'll say is what led me to kind of go down that path. As anyone else on this call, if you are a forensic accountant, know there is not a great work-life balance when it comes to being a forensic accountant, especially when you're working on active litigation. You never really know what's going to hit. And so I was at a point in my life where I was like, okay, I'm ready for a better work-life balance. Let me think about going in-house somewhere where this job's really 40 hours a week. It's not 40 hours a week plus maybe nights, weekends, vacations, those types of things. And so what appealed to me about the traveler's role is fun, great hours, great work-life balance. You get the benefits of working for a big company, but we were really this like niche and specialized team. And so when I was at CRA, we did business interruption claims for cyber losses. And so CRA is one of the top preferred vendors for those types of preparations. They'll work on behalf of the insured or the carrier, depending on how the case comes in. And so I had exposure to the industry from CRA, but Travelers was applying it to property claims. And so it's very rare to have that type of an in-house role at an insurance company. And even having that in-house role, Travelers still outsourced 50% of their claims to outside consultants because the volume is so high. And so for Travelers, it's this cost-saving benefit of we can pay people salaries instead of paying them hourly to do all of these claims. We can do them in-house. We can also use these people to educate our adjusters, educate the insureds about how the business income claims go, what can be expected, and really kind of control some of the narrative in this space by helping everyone just understand the coverage a little more. So it was great. It was steady. You take 5 claims a month, you work on them. But then, as the forensic accountant, I started to miss the chaos and the stress and the intrigue a little bit more.
That's something I hear more often than not from people that do try the in-house roles. And it's funny, isn't it? We all look to try and secure as best balance that we can. But quite often, if you've done well in an accounting or consulting firm before, like you had, it's probably because personality-wise, you're quite suited to it. But all of this then led to, I guess, quite an exciting announcement for you earlier this year in terms of going down the entrepreneurial route and setting up your own firm, SEM Forensics. I guess take us back to sort of how you made that decision, because it's a brave one to set up your own business.
Yes, and I like to qualify it because I don't think I was as brave as some. So I was in a great position that Travelers did not have any employment restrictions on secondary employment. So I was actually able to build out my firm while I was still working at Travelers. I didn't take any insurance claims to avoid that conflict of interest, but it allowed me to test the waters and see if it was something that I wanted to do, it was worthwhile, and I thought I could sustain. So that was, a huge help in this decision. And truthfully, I tell people I never had this intention. I didn't go into forensics and I'm like, oh, one day I'm going to run my own firm. I really want to testify. Let me be a testifying expert. It kind of just fell in my lap as I started doing some freelance work. So when I was at Travelers, it's actually funny. So my husband is a physician and he has the ability to moonlight. And if he takes a moonlighting shift, they pay him like 5,000 times they usually pay him on a daily basis. But he has no time to do this. He works 80 hours a week. And so I thought to myself, I was like, wait, why can't I moonlight? Like, isn't that something that we could do in the forensics industry? Because I do have this skill set of different types of forensic cases that I'm not using at Travelers. So I started reaching out to experts in the field who own their own firms. And I was like, hey, do you ever need a project manager? Do you need someone, to take your overflow? And that's how I started building out. So I started working for these other experts. I started building out my expertise, learning more about different areas of forensics that maybe were smaller and didn't come across at CRA as much. And then that's when I saw that there was this niche and this need in the market for these smaller firms, for forensics to be more affordable, have that more personal relationship between the firm owner and the client and the attorney. And so all of that together gave me the knowledge, I'll say chutzpah to say, okay, I think I can do this. I know others just like quit their job and start a firm the next day. That was not me. It was definitely more methodical and tested the waters more before I made that leap.
Like you say, you were obviously lucky enough to be in an employed position where you could do that.
Right.
But regardless, you still had to be proactive enough to, like you say, reach out to those other experts to start gaining that experience to test the market. I want to pull back to something you mentioned there, if I can, around, you know, as you started this journey, that you started doing work that you hadn't really done at CRA before, and you mentioned, I think a second ago, a need for forensic accounting to be more accessible. For maybe any more junior listeners in their career who maybe have only worked for a very big firm before working on, these huge international arbitrations or massive investigations, what does the type of work look like being a solo practitioner like yourself? Or what kind of cases now in your new firm would you be taking on?
Yeah, so I think the biggest is matrimonial work. So there are some larger firms that will handle it. CRA was not one of them. I think I worked maybe one matrimonial case when I was with them, and it was very large in scale. So that's about 30 to 40% of my practice. And as I meet other solo firms, that is a large percentage of their practices as well. And so you take a situation where a client maybe has $10,000 for forensics fees. And if you go to a big firm, that's 5 of a partner's
That's day
hours.
one.
Yeah, like that's everyone in a meeting. That is the
Yeah.
attorneys, the forensic experts having a debrief meeting, and you've charged $10,000. So being able to say, okay, what do you need? What can we do? And also existing in spaces that are adjacent to litigation, like mediation. And so, okay, you need a business valuation, your spouse owns a business, you're going through a divorce. I saw something recently that someone was quoted $90,000 for a business valuation in mediation, which is, again, big firms. I understand they have this overhead, but that's not something your everyday person who runs their solo business can afford. And so, how do we take the skills and experience we have from these big firms and apply it to some of these smaller cases? So, we give them really quality analyses and expertise, but at a price that they can actually afford. So, matrimonial is a huge area. I also super excited. I've done one of these cases so far. I hope to do more. I was an expert in a Criminal Justice Act case. So in the United States, a lot of people know about public defenders, but if you are indicted and charged with a federal crime, you can be appointed an attorney through the Criminal Justice Act. And then that attorney can appoint an expert depending on the needs of the case. So this was someone was charged with healthcare fraud, and they had like multiple entities, multiple bank accounts, and we were able to trace the funds through and ultimately understand the story of what happened and help the defense attorneys question the government's witnesses and put together a narrative based on, what we saw actually happen from the numbers versus, some speculative claims that had been added to the case.
I love what you said about, you are making this more accessible because it's so true. It's probably really exciting when you're a bit more junior in your career, work on these really high profile cases that end up, on the front page of the Financial Times. Or, I know one of my clients here in the UK, it was a matrimonial case. It's the largest ever divorce settlement in UK history. Great. I'm sure early days, that's really exciting. But like you say, there's lots of, you know, upper to middle class divorce cases where, we're not talking tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, are we? Where you can have these giant legal teams and whole, departments of forensic accountants to come and support. You need people that can come and be the experts on these sort of middle cases, and I think that's really great. To anyone listening, maybe that has that entrepreneurial bug in them and is thinking, oh, I'm actually listening to Sarah talk about this, maybe I do want to give it a go. What are maybe some of the unexpected challenges? Is there anything you've faced in this sort of first year or so of running your own firm that you just would not have imagined of being a challenge, sort of 12 months ago?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you work at these bigger firms, maybe you have the opportunity to help in business development. Maybe you don't. Like I remember at CRA, occasionally I would do some research or put together some binders for the VPs who are then going out and trying to win these clients. When you have your own firm, you are the BD aspect of your firm until you grow it out and you can hire someone. So it's not just being able to do your job well. It's not just being able to, you know, write your reports. Maybe you have to have this like speaking ability and testimony, but now you have to be this persuasive and charismatic individual day in and day out to try to get clients. And it's not just, oh, hey, I talked to this person, and every matrimonial attorney has someone who needs forensic accounting. That's not the case. You might talk to them, they don't have a need for forensic accounting, and 6 months later, they have a client who needs it. But now you're not top of mind because you talked to them 6 months ago. So you have to follow up. You have to go to networking events, sponsor events. And it's really the hardest challenge I have right now is the balance of you're not getting paid to do all of this. But if you don't do it, you don't bring in the work that pays your bills. So as a new firm that has bills and overhead and, I don't have a salary from another job anymore, how I balance the networking versus the actual billable work has been probably my biggest challenge.
Mm. Is there anything, any resources or anything you look to maybe learn those skills? Because like you say, particularly for maybe those people below depends what firms call them these days, but senior manager, associate director, in a lot of firms, if you're below that sort of 8 to 10 years experience level, you just don't get any exposure, like you say, to anything. Maybe now and again you can help out by putting some data on a PowerPoint slide that's going to go to a client. You're never there in the meeting, are you? Or very, very rarely.
Correct.
How did you kind of foster those skills? Did you either have, I don't know, maybe sort of mentors that you could go to learn that, or maybe there's sort of books or videos, or what did you do to kind of build those skills?
Yeah, so the experts that I started working for were really great mentors for me. And then there were even some other experts that I came in contact with who didn't have work for me, but we meet every 3 months. We talk about what's going well in our practice because it is a changing landscape. Like, what technology are you using? How are you getting clients? What's worked for you? What hasn't? That's been really instrumental for me. The other thing is a lot of trial and error. It's really, there's no other way to put it. I think I paid like $2,000 for like this printing and mailing company to send mailings to matrimonial firms, public adjusters. Didn't hear a word back. My husband and I spent one weekend printing out brochures at Staples and mailing it to people's offices, and I have heard back from those. And so you never know where it's going to come from. And so the other obstacle that I will say, and I will appreciate that it hasn't been mentioned yet, is I look very young. And so when I go into a meeting, the first thing that attorney thinks is, who are you pretending to be a forensic accounting expert? Like, you just graduated from school, you have a couple years under your belt. And so what I can say is being really confident in your skills is what helps propel me. And my favorite parts of these conversations is I'll go in with an attorney and they'll be like, why are you here? And then we'll talk about their cases and we'll talk about my fee structure. And by the end of the meeting or, the interaction, they want to schedule some time to talk about it further. And so it's really being vulnerable, putting yourself out there, being okay with failing 90% of the time, and hoping that the 10% of clients that you get sustain you and that you do a really great job, and then the referrals start flowing in.
That's it's funny, that end bit there is so, that's where our jobs, as different as they are, actually become quite similar. You
Mm-hmm.
know, that business development is always the hardest part. Same for a recruiter as it is for a forensic accountant. Um, an old boss of mine once said to me, the best form of business development is good delivery. You know,
Mm-hmm.
if you do a good job, you will get referred on, whether it's within that organization or to others. You've also really embraced, I think, social media. It's one of the things that, now we've known each other a couple of years, but it's one of the things that re-highlighted your new firm to me when I was getting the first series of guests for these podcasts. I think you're doing a really great job on LinkedIn of, I'd call it like subtle marketing. It's not ostentatious. It's not, wow, look at me, look how great I am. But you're just doing all the right things, I think, in terms of interacting with different communities. And, you know, you're always in my feed, which I know means you're always going to be in lawyers and adjusters and all these other people in your network. Again, was social media something you had experience in beforehand, or is that also something you've had to sort of learn and get some expertise in order to run your own business?
Yeah, it's definitely part of that trial and error. And exactly what you said, I think there's a fine line between marketing yourself and being present and being obnoxious. And so that's what I'm really trying to, figure out. Like I see some posts and obviously I see them. So they're greatly marketed. They come across my feed and it's like, I went to the grocery store yesterday and I had to wait 5 minutes. And this is what it taught me about B2B marketing. And so it's just trying to be a little bit more relatable, trying to put myself out there, and also using it as a resource. So a lot of what I'm posting is we have this great event where we're talking about forensic accounting in a divorce. If you're an attorney, get this to your client. It's not just, hire me, but it's I have, these free events or these free opportunities that I really think your clients can benefit from. Here's a way to connect with them.
I think it's going to be more and more important, particularly for solo practitioners or smaller firms, because we know that the big firms have got these ginormous marketing budgets. They can have marketing directors and managers and whole teams internally, can't they? They've got the budget to sponsor, they can sponsor Paris Arbitration Week as a platinum sponsor or this sort of thing. Realistically, solo practitioners or small independent firms can't compete with that. But the beautiful thing about the internet is it's a level playing field, right? And so it's more down to, like you say, sort of being original with your content, being consistent, putting the time in, and then you've got just as good a chance of any of being at the top of people's LinkedIn feeds or Twitter or whatever platform people want to use. No, I think it's a really valuable skill, and I think particularly this newer, younger generation of forensic accountants are really starting to embrace it, which is great. Well, look, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really, really great to chat. If people want to connect with you or hear more from you or maybe talk to you about using your services, where can they go to find more information?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you said, I have a LinkedIn preference. I have a website. It's just snforensics.com. Keep it simple. And on that note, I do have a lot of people that reach out to me that say, hey, I'm thinking about starting my own firm. Do you have 30 minutes? And my answer is always going to be yes. I think enough people have supported me and helped me along this journey. I'd love to chat about what works well, what doesn't work well, give you some tips and tricks. And I love that interaction. I have one, I think, on Friday this week. I have a couple next week. So really don't hesitate to reach out. I love the conversation. I love hearing what other people are doing. And I think I'll learn as much from you as you'll learn from me.
I love the pay it forward attitude. I think it's so important. Great. Well, we'll put the links to your LinkedIn profile and your website in the show notes as well, so anyone can access that. Sarah, thank you so much for your time. It was really great to catch up and to chat and hear all about your career and the launch of SM Forensics. I wish you all the best of luck moving forward. Thank you. Guys, thanks for joining us today. If you've got any follow-up questions, you can contact Sarah or myself. We'll see you soon.
Thanks so much for having me.